So if I told you that painful friction during intimacy actually begins with, like, starving microscopic bacteria in this silent immunological war inside your mucus, you'd probably think I'm crazy. But you'd be wrong. We tend to think of friction as just a purely mechanical problem.
Yo, for sure. Just rough surface meets delicate skin, and you get a micro tear.
Right. It feels like simple physics. But when you actually look at the mucosal surfaces of the body, well, that simple physics equation completely falls apart.
It really does, because, I mean, on a mucosal surface, mechanical pain isn't the beginning of the problem at all. It is literally the absolute final alarm bell of a biological chain reaction. And that reaction started on a microscopic level long before any physical rubbing ever occurred.
Exactly. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking a massive stack of medical research, gynecological guidelines, and immunological frontiers to answer a highly specific and mind-bending question.
It's a really good one, too.
Yeah. We're asking, how do shifts in the local concentration of an immune antibody called secretory immunoglobulin A, which we'll just call SIGA, affect the mucosal barrier's defense against friction-induced pain?
It's such a fascinating question, because we are essentially exploring an entire microscopic ecosystem here, specifically the vaginal and vulval mucosa. And to really understand why a person experiences physical discomfort during intimacy, or frankly, even just walking around.
Right, just existing.
Exactly. We have to trace the issue all the way back to the behavior of immune proteins and commensal bacteria.
So to even begin to understand how friction causes pain in this environment, we first need to look at the body's natural shock absorber. Talking about
You
mucus.
see, he's like the unsung hero.
Totally. The vaginal and cervical mucosa are protected by this highly complex viscoelastic hydrogel. Now, it is over 95% water, which, makes sense. But water alone doesn't give you a protective barrier. I mean, it would just run right off.
Right, water has zero structural integrity on its own. So the structure, that thick gel-like consistency, comes from an intricate network of proteins called gel-forming mucins, or GFMs.
Okay.
And in the specific mucosa, we're mostly looking at two proteins called MUC5B and MUC5AC. These mucins link together to form this massive three-dimensional polymeric mesh.
And this mesh is incredibly tight, right? It has an average pore size of about 350 nanometers.
It is incredibly tiny.
Yeah, to put that into perspective for you, that is tiny enough to trap most bacteria and viruses, forming a literal physical wall. It moisturizes the underlying epithelial tissue and acts as this dynamic cushion against repetitive friction.
It does, but we have to ask, how exactly does a gel absorb friction?
Right.
Well, it comes down to viscoelasticity. Because it's a hydrogel, when mechanical force is applied, say, the kinetic energy of sexual intercourse, the water molecules within that mucin mesh actually briefly shift. They redistribute to absorb the load.
Oh, wow. So it physically morphs under pressure.
Exactly. Then, when the force is removed, the protein bonds just pull the gel right back into its original shape. It is a highly specialized, self-healing mechanical shield. But here is the really critical part. It is not just a passive wall of jello.
Right. It is actively patrolled.
Right.
Which brings us to the star of our show, SIGA, or Secretory IgA. This is the most abundant immunoglobulin at mucosal surfaces.
The absolute most abundant, yes.
But I've always wondered, what makes it so special compared to the standard antibodies floating around in our bloodstream?
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't the body just use standard IgG to protect the vagina?
Oh, that's a great question. It's because systemic antibodies, like the ones in your blood, operate in a sterile, tightly pH-controlled, and highly regulated internal environment.
Right, it's very safe in there.
Exactly. If you put a standard blood antibody out on a mucosal surface, it would be destroyed almost immediately. SIGA is uniquely designed to operate outside the body.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it gets secreted directly onto these moist, external-facing surfaces. To survive the harsh enzymes and fluctuating pH out there, two IgA molecules actually bind together and wrap themselves in something called a secretory component.
It's essentially biological body armor.
That is exactly what it is. It prevents the antibody from being digested by the very environment it's trying to protect.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. If we think about the mucosal tissue as a highly exclusive nightclub.
I love this.
Right. The mucus hydrogel, that 350 nanometer mesh, is the velvet rope. It's the physical space keeping the crowds away from the VIP sections. And SIGA, those are the heavily armed bouncers embedded directly within that velvet rope, checking everyone who tries to get close.
That works perfectly. And to push that analogy even further, these bouncers aren't just standing near the rope, they are permanently attached to it.
Wait, attached how?
Well, SIGA is heavily glycosylated. In biochemical terms, that means it is heavily coated in complex sugar chains.
Why sugars? Do they act like a glue or something?
Exactly like a glue. Those specific sugar chains allow the SIGA antibodies to tangle with and anchor perfectly into the mucin fibers of the mucus gel. They physically bind to the MUC5B and MUC5AC proteins.
Oh, I see.
So the bouncers are completely woven into the velvet rope, creating a dynamic physical shield against the outside world.
Okay, so the mucus provides the shock absorption to stop friction, but the SIGA maintains the mucus, and it manages the bacteria trying to get in. But how does it actually stop a microscopic threat?
It handles this through a primary strategy called immune exclusion. Because it has multiple binding sites, SIGA physically grabs onto passing pathogens.
It just holds them there.
Basically, yeah, that cross-links them, clumping multiple viruses or bacteria together right there in the mucus through a process known as steric hindrance.
Right, steric hindrance. This isn't just about blocking a receptor, is it? It's literally a geometry problem.
Precisely. It is creating a massive physical traffic jam. SIGA grabs these pathogens and creates bulky three-dimensional complexes.
And remember that 350 nanometer pore size in the mucus mesh we talked about earlier.
Yes. By clumping the invaders together, SIGA ensures they are simply too massive to fit through those tiny pores. They get entirely trapped in the upper layers of the mucus.
Stuck in the velvet rope. And then what? Do they just sit there forever?
No, they get mechanically ejected from the body during natural mucus renewal, normal discharge, or menstruation. The body literally just sheds the top layer of the trap.
That is so efficient.
It is. And interestingly, SIGA is so efficient that it can even intercept viruses intracellularly.
Wait, inside the cell?
Yeah. As the antibody is being transported through the epithelial cell to be secreted onto the surface, if it encounters a virus trying to infect that exact cell, it will neutralize it from the inside before it even reaches the surface.
That is just incredible multitasking. But, I mean, this brings up a massive contradiction, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, we know the vaginal microbiome isn't sterile. It relies on beneficial bacteria, specifically lactobacilli. So if SIGA is this aggressive bouncer tying up everything in the mucus, how does it not attack the lactobacilli? Because if it attacked everything, the immune system would just be in a constant state of massive tissue-damaging inflammation.
What's fascinating here is that SIGA is fundamentally a non-inflammatory antibody. This is so crucial to understand.
Okay.
When a systemic antibody in your blood finds a target, it sets off biochemical alarms. It activates the complement system, recruits aggressive white blood cells, and causes massive localized inflammation to destroy the invader.
Which usually feels like heat, swelling, and pain.
Exactly. But if that happened on your mucosal surfaces every single time you encountered a microbe, your vaginal tissues would be constantly inflamed, swollen, and destroyed.
The friction defense would be completely ruined by your own immune system.
Right. So SIGA operates completely differently. It engages in what we call immune inclusion.
Inclusion, not exclusion.
Yes. It quietly coats the commensal-friendly bacteria like lactobacilli. It keeps them tethered in the mucus so they don't penetrate the deeper tissue, but it does it without triggering that crazy inflammatory cascade. It establishes a quiet tolerance.
So it's basically giving the VIPs a gentle escort to their table so they stay out of trouble rather than, tackling them to the floor.
Exactly. And by maintaining that peace, SIGA allows the lactobacilli to really thrive, which is essential because those lactobacilli are the chemical architects of the friction defense.
Well, let's talk about that architecture because it's driven by this brilliant hormonal conveyor belt. We all know estrogen is the dominant hormone here, but its mechanical function is just fascinating.
It really plays a huge structural role.
Yeah, estrogen drives the continuous proliferation and maturation of the vaginal epithelial cells. As these cells mature and get pushed up to the surface, they fill with glycogen. And in a healthy environment, those superficial cells are shedding every few hours.
Right, and when they shed, they burst open and dump all that glycogen straight into the mucus.
Like a buffet.
Exactly. That glycogen is the absolute primary food source for the lactobacilli.
And as the lactobacilli feast on the glycogen, they ferment it and produce lactic acid. This keeps the whole environment at a very low, highly acidic pH, usually under 4.5.
Which is an incredibly hostile environment for most opportunistic disease-causing bacteria.
So a perfect symbiotic loop. Estrogen provides the glycogen, lactobacilli eat it and produce acid. The acid keeps pathogens away.
And the SIGA peacefully manages the lactobacilli without causing inflammation. The result is a thick, perfectly balanced, viscoelastic mucus that completely absorbs the physical friction of daily life or intimacy.
But what happens when that loop breaks? Because we know that shifts in SIGA concentration lead directly to pain. So why does SIGA drop in the first place?
Well, this is where we see the biological chain reaction really begin. It's often triggered by a hormonal shift.
Like menopause.
Yes, the classic example is genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM. When estrogen levels plummet, that cellular conveyor belt we just talked about just grinds to a halt.
Wow.
The robust, multi-layered epithelium stops proliferating. The shedding of superficial cells drops from a healthy high percentage all the way down to below 10%.
And if the cells aren't shedding, the glycogen stops flowing.
Exactly. The glycogen completely dries up. Without glycogen, the lactobacilli literally starve to death. And when they die off, the production of lactic acid just plummets.
Which means the pH rises. Once the vaginal pH creeps up above 5.0, it creates an alkaline environment. And that is the exact signal opportunistic pathogens have been waiting for, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Bacteria like E. coli and Gardnerella vaginalis, which are the primary culprits in bacterial vaginosis, they suddenly wake up and start rapidly multiplying.
And this is where the microscopic warfare turns really brutal. Because these pathogenic bacteria don't just passively exist in the space, they actively launch a counteroffensive against the host's immune system.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the bacteria deploy targeted biological weapons.
They do.
They secrete these specific enzymes called sialidases. Now, remember earlier we talked about how SIGA is heavily glycosylated. It uses sugar chains to anchor itself into the mucus velvet rope.
Right.
Well, sialidases are basically molecular scissors that literally chop off those terminal sialic acid sugars on the SIGA antibodies.
It's devious. By chopping off those sugars, the pathogens are blinding and disarming the host's primary immune defense.
Because they can't anchor anymore.
Exactly. Without those specific sugar anchors, the SIGA can no longer bind to the mucin mesh. It just floats away, totally useless. The bouncers are completely removed from the equation.
So if the sialidases are disarming the bouncers by cutting their anchors, what happens to the mucus itself?
Yeah.
Because once the SIG is compromised, the pathogens release a second wave of enzymes, right?
Yes, they do.
The mucinases, I'm assuming they're basically taking a sledgehammer to the mesh itself.
That is exactly what they do. The mucinases, which include destructive enzymes like aminopeptidases and galactosidases, they target the gel-forming mucin backbone.
Brutal.
They literally digest the MUC5B and MUC5AC protein structures. They completely break the bonds that hold that 350 nanometer mesh together.
So they are literally eating the velvet rope.
Yes. The mucus hydrogel completely loses its structural integrity. It stops being a viscoelastic, shock-absorbing gel and degrades into a thin, watery fluid that cannot absorb kinetic energy at all.
It just completely loses its ability to lubricate and protect the tissue beneath it.
Exactly.
And it's really worth noting here, this collapse of SIGA isn't just about estrogen. Chronic systemic stress can also drastically lower mucosal SIGA production, triggering this exact same cascade even in younger populations.
That's a great point.
A drop in SIGA opens the floodgates for dysbiosis, and the bad bacteria physically destroy the tissue's natural lubrication.
Right, and now we have arrived at the physical consequences, the molecular defenses. The SIGA are disabled, the chemical defenses, the lactic acid from lactobacilli are gone.
And the physical barrier, the mucin hydrogel, has been eaten away.
Yes.
So if you're experiencing this kind of friction-induced pain, what is actually happening physically? Like, how does this microscopic war translate to the severe burning and tearing associated with intimacy, or even just wearing tight clothing?
Well, now we have to look at the anatomical degradation of the underlying tissue itself. Without the protective mucus and without the regenerative signaling of estrogen, the vaginal epithelium undergoes progressive, severe thinning.
It just shrinks.
It loses that robust, thick structure that normally withstands pressure.
The submucosal layer underneath loses its vascularization too. The blood vessels shrink, meaning blood flow decreases. The tissue is literally suffocating.
It's starved of oxygen.
And the connective tissue goes through these dramatic rigid changes. The fibroblasts, the cells responsible for producing collagen and keeping tissue plump and healthy, they essentially go dormant. They devolve into inactive cells called fibrocytes.
And the matrix those cells leave behind just deteriorates. The existing collagen fibers in the tissue start to hyalinize, which is a process where they fuse together into a stiff, almost glassy, inflexible state.
Wow.
And the elastin fibers, which give the tissue its ability to stretch and recoil, they begin to fragment and snap entirely.
It makes me think of, like, An old rubber band or a dried-out kitchen sponge. When a sponge is plump and full of water, you can squish it, twist it, and it bounces right back.
Yes, perfect analogy.
But if you leave it in the sun and it dries out, the fibers become super brittle. If you try to bend a dry sponge, it just cracks and tears.
That is a highly accurate physical analogy. You have tissue that is thin, blood-deprived, incredibly stiff, and completely lacking in stretch.
It is a recipe for disaster.
And on top of that, we have to consider the native anatomy. I mean, the vulva already has a naturally higher coefficient of friction than other skin on the body.
So we bring back the physics equation we started with. Without that viscoelastic mucus hydrogel acting as a cushion, the kinetic friction from daily activities, walking, sitting, exercising, or the sustained friction from sexual intercourse creates catastrophic mechanical damage on this brittle, fragile tissue.
The physical results are brutal. We see micro tears in the epithelium. The tissue becomes friable, meaning it bleeds easily at the absolute slightest touch. You get petechiae, which are those tiny pinpoint blood spots from broken capillaries right at the surface. And the patient experiences severe superficial dyspareunia, which is the medical term for intensely painful intercourse.
So the mechanical friction is literally tearing the tissue apart because the immunological and structural support systems are completely gone. The dry sponge is cracking.
Precisely. The friction is just the final mechanical manifestation of the immunological failure.
So what does this all mean for you? If someone is experiencing this intense burning, itching, and pain, their first instinct is usually, I just need to run to the pharmacy and get a topical lubricant. It's just a friction problem.
Right, that's what everyone thinks.
But based on the mechanisms we just discussed, isn't applying a standard lubricant just putting a temporary Band-Aid on a massive, localized immune and structural collapse?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, it absolutely is. Now, to be fair, clinical guidelines do heavily discuss lubricants and moisturizers. A well-formulated lubricant can mimic natural secretions and offer immediate short-term mechanical relief from the physical grinding. It temporarily acts as that shock-absorbing layer.
But the formulation really matters, right? The guidelines specifically warn about checking the osmolality of those lubricants.
Very much so.
The World Health Organization recommends they should be under 1,200 milliosmoles per kilogram.
Yes, and that just comes down to the basic physics of osmosis. The cells in your mucosal tissue have an internal osmolality of about 290 milliosmoles.
Okay.
Water always moves toward the higher concentration of solutes to balance things out. But many commercial lubricants on the market have an osmolality of 3,000 or even 4,000.
Oh, wow. So if you put a hyperosmolar lubricant on that tissue, the water's going to get sucked out of your already struggling epithelial cells just to dilute the lubricant.
Exactly. It forces the cells to shrivel, dehydrate, and ultimately die, which obviously damages the mucosal barrier even further in the long run.
That's terrible.
Yeah, so a properly formulated isoosmolar lubricant stops the immediate physical grinding, but to your point, it does not fix the underlying lack of SIGA. It doesn't resurrect the bed lactobacilli. It doesn't wake up the dormant fibrocytes. And it certainly doesn't rebuild the complex 350 nanometer mucin networks.
It is just an incredible chain reaction. It all starts with the local concentration of SIGA.
Yep.
If those heavily glycosylated bouncers fail, whether it's because a drop in estrogen starved their lactobacilli allies, or chronic stress suppressed the immune system, or pathogenic bacterial saladices actively chopped off their anchors, the whole ecosystem collapses.
It's a domino effect.
The lubricating mucus gets devoured by nucinases, the underlying tissue thins out and stiffens into that dry sponge, and then inevitably simple physical friction causes micro tears, bleeding, and severe pain.
It perfectly highlights how completely interconnected human biology is. You absolutely cannot separate the physical mechanics of friction from the deep immunological health of the mucosal barrier. They are one and the same.
Which brings us to a final, slightly mind-bending concept from the research that we want to leave you with today. We spent this entire time hyper-focused on the local environment of the reproductive tract.
Just the vagina and the vulva, yeah.
But the immunological frontier right now points to something called the gut-vagina axis.
Oh, this is truly one of the most exciting areas of modern immunology. We've learned that the bacteria in your gastrointestinal tract produce metabolites when they ferment dietary fiber.
Right.
The most important of these are called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
These SCFAs don't just stay in your colon, they actually get absorbed into your systemic bloodstream. And as they circulate through your entire body, these gut-derived molecules actually reach and influence the vaginal epithelium.
They do. They can profoundly modulate local inflammation, alter nutrient availability for the lactobacilli, and most importantly, they directly affect systemic and mucosal immune responses.
Including the production and secretion of SIGA.
Exactly. Thousands of miles away, biologically speaking, in the reproductive tract.
So if your gut is in a state of dysbiosis, maybe from a poor diet or, a round of antibiotics, that could theoretically shift the immune permissiveness of your vaginal mucosa.
It certainly could.
It lowers the SIGA, making it easier for the bad bacteria to take over and start that entire destructive mucus-eating chain reaction we just outlined.
It really means the barrier defense against friction is a whole body process. The health of the mucosal velvet rope relies on signals coming all the way from your digestive system.
So as you go about your day, it is wild to ponder that what you eat for lunch, like the specific dietary fiber you feed your gut microbiome, might eventually dictate the SIGA levels, the mucus integrity, and ultimately the friction defenses of your reproductive tract. Everything is connected.
It certainly makes you rethink the definition of a mechanical injury, doesn't it?
It really does. Next time you think about physical friction, remember the invisible, heavily armed immunological army fighting to keep your microscopic velvet ropes intact. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.